now what we're going to do is we are going to finish up this class. So we have our private variables or our state variables, and we could add more state variables. We might in a second to get like color, for example. We'd add a red, green, and blue value. We have two public static final integers that set limits. We've only set limits on velocity, all right? But we could do it for position. We could do it for ellipse width and ellipse height. I'm just doing this as an example so you understand the concept. But if you do it for all those, you'll just have a lot more code here. It's actually very common in Java to have these long classes with a lot of public static final limits, right? Things that are limits. All right. And now we've got to make our constructor. So remember the analogy. We can say int x, and then if we want to initialize x, we could say x equals 5. Okay. And that's because x is a box in memory that's an integer. Okay. And 5 is an integer value. Ball is a type we made up. We created ball, okay? And we said it'd be cool to have a ball that was a collection of a bunch of variables. The variables we're going to use to represent a ball are the variables we need to draw it, which is the position and the width and height, right? If someone gives me the position, I know the center point, and I know the width and height, I can draw our ball, right? Or our ellipse, whatever, all right? And the other thing we need is, well, how does it move from frame to frame? That's the x velocity and the y velocity, okay? So we have these 6 variables that define a ball object. Well, some of you might be saying, wait, there's 2 more variables down here that define this an object of ball. But remember, these aren't state variables. These actually just belong to the ball class itself, right? Because they're static, okay? So here are our state variables. Okay, and that means they tell us the state of a given object of the ball class. Over here we have 2 balls, my ball 1 and my ball 2. Okay, so what if we want to give them an initial state? What if I want ball 1 to start at a certain position, going in a certain direction, at a certain speed, with a certain width and height, right? And I wanted ball 2 to be going in a certain direction with a certain speed, right? Start at a certain position, be going in a certain direction and a certain speed with its width and height. Okay. How do I say I want the initial position of the ball to be this, right? Or I want the initial values of the initial state of the ball, is what I should say, to be all of these things. I want a way to define all of these things at once. Well, we're able to define the initial state of x, right? We could say x equals 5. How do we do that for a ball? Well, since a ball has 6 variables, we have a mechanism to do that. It's called a method, right? We've done classless methods or classless functions, and now we're going to relook at the constructor through the lens of our through the lens of it being a function, because that's what it is. It's a function that takes in whatever number of values we need to set all of these private variables. And remember, the constructor always sets the private variables. It gives the private variables initial values. No matter what, that's what the constructor does, okay? So let's come up with our constructor. We can say public ball, and then we're going to pass in some variables, some initial values for all of these state variables. So init x pos, right? Init y pos, and init x val. I know that's ugly. Init y val. Okay, and then init ellipse width and init ellipse height. I'm sorry, those are ugly variable names. And you might want to give them types, right? And remember, those types should match the private variable that they are initializing. In our case, they all happen to be ints, so we can do that. All right, whatever. Okay, so we're kind of in business now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use these values to initialize these values, okay? And if we happen to have limits, we're going to first make sure, for example, since the velocity is the only one we have a limit on, in velocity's case, we'll make sure that the velocity that it's going to be initialized to is a valid velocity. And if not, we'll set it to some default value, okay? So on position and width and height, we're going to assume that the value they pass in is correct. We don't have any limits on those values, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to go xpos equals init x position, right? ypos equals init y position, okay? We will actually do a check on velocity, right? So we'll say, well, if the x velocity, right, is, if init x velocity, so the x velocity they're passing in is less than or equal to, it doesn't matter. You can say less than or equal to, depending on if you want it to be 5 or you always want it to be less than 5, right? Or sometimes it can be 5, if that's valid, right? It's greater than or equal to velocity min. So if the velocity they passed in is valid in terms of the min and max, well then we will set x to that. So we can say x val equals init x val, okay? And otherwise, we're going to make it some default value, okay? It might actually be nice if we're using a default value and it's always the same value, right? For every single object, then we can just define it up here. And I'm just gonna define it as 1 and then else x val equals default velocity, okay? And we can do the same thing with y, and this is, I know, init y velocity, velocity max, init y velocity, velocity min, y velocity. This is just a great way to make a mistake, by the way, what I'm doing right now. But I think I got it right. Okay, so now we got everything with y. Yep. Okay, and then we have ellipse width and ellipse height, right? Those are the last two things. What's this? Oh yeah, that's the ball. Okay, good. So we can say ellipse width equals init EW and ellipse height equals init EY. Okay? And E height, EH. Okay. And so this should work. We could, I guess we can't see anything yet because we haven't drawn the ball or done anything cool like that. We could create a function to draw the ball. That's actually not that hard. So we could say draw ball, right? I think we named it draw ball. I don't remember what we named it, but it really doesn't matter. It's a void function because all it's doing is it's drawing to the screen. It's not returning anything, right? And so void draw ball, we could say something like ellipse, x pos, y pos, ellipse width, and ellipse height, right? And that should draw the ball at the x position and the y position with a given width and a given height, all right? And that's great, right? That's the current state of the ball, so that's what we should see. And now we can initialize this thing. So I could say I want my ball 1, right, to, well, how do I invoke the constructor? The way we invoke the constructor is we use the name of the class. Notice the constructor has the same name as the class, okay? We use it with a special keyword, the new keyword, right? So new ball, and I know this is review, but it's good to go over it. I'm gonna do our classic width over 2 and height over 2 scheme, and then I'm gonna make this thing 30 by 30, and oh, we also have to give it an initial velocity. I'll do 1 and 1, so it's going that direction. Okay, and I'll do my ball to be the opposite direction. Okay? Cool. All right. And so we haven't updated it yet, right? All we've done is draw it, and we haven't even drawn it. What we have to do in here is we have to invoke draw, right? So my ball 1.draw ball, right? And my ball 2.draw ball. And I don't know, we're not passing in 0 for that because draw ball doesn't take in any values. It just uses the private state variables that have already been defined. Well, at this point, when we hit play, we should be able to see 2 balls, except these balls will be drawn right on top of each other, so maybe that's a bad idea. So I'll put one at 60-60 or something like that, so that one will be in the top left and one will be in the middle, and we'll make this a little bigger so that they look different. And let's see if it works. It didn't work, so let's go see why. We're missing a parameter, and you can actually see it here. It says the constructor int is undefined. When you see that, you're gonna say, wait a second, I made a constructor. It's right here. What are they talking about, right? Count the number of parameters, because what I have here is 5 parameters, the one I just passed in, and out here, there's 6 of them, okay? Remember, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you're trying to do 5 parameters, or if you don't put in the same right parameters, or if I try to put in a string in here like hello, right, it's gonna say, wait, there's no constructor that takes in 5 integers and a string. That's not gonna work. Okay, so what that's telling you is not that maybe you didn't attempt to define a constructor. What it's saying is that the constructor you defined there's no constructor that matches your invocation, right? And just based on the parameters, their types, okay? The number of parameters and their types. All right, let's see what happens. All right, back in business, right? Okay, so I'm gonna stop here. We're gonna finish up classes in the next video. We're taking it a little slow with classes. You already know most of the stuff, and then we'll have a programming thing at the end of classes, and then we'll continue on with the next lesson, all right? The next review lesson.